I worked as a live-in caregiver for a 65-year-old woman named Martha who had a developmental disability. Her daughter Colleen, in her 40s, often worked the night shift and needed someone with medical experience to care for her mother overnight. Colleen contacted me because she likely had no other family members to help her and was unwilling or unable to place her mother in a nursing home. Hiring someone with caregiving experience might give her peace of mind. I had worked with 2 other women with developmental disabilities, but nothing could have prepared me for that night. Colleen left for work early that day, and I had finished my main job. I was trying to make some extra money, despite my physical exhaustion. When Colleen introduced me to Martha, she gave her a friendly smile before she led her to her bedroom. It was around 9 p.m., and Colleen told me that Martha might be wandering around the house at night and that I would need to calm her down and get her back to her room. I asked if it was sleepwalking, but Colleen explained that it was a symptom of her mother's dementia. I assured her that I could handle it. At first, I sat in the living room, turned on the TV, and watched my favorite show. This kind of thing was not very hectic, mostly sitting and waiting and being ready when needed. I heard footsteps coming upstairs. I went out to the stairs and called Martha's name, asking if she needed anything, but there was no answer. I heard footsteps coming back into the room and the door closed. She must have gone to the bathroom. I went back into the living room and continued watching TV. About an hour later, I went into the kitchen to get the sandwich I had brought. When I walked out of the kitchen, I almost dropped my plate in shock when I saw Martha standing right in front of the kitchen door. I apologized to her and asked if she was okay. She started yelling at me, asking who I was and why I was there. Even though I tried to explain that I was Colleen's hired caregiver, she continued to yell at me, demanding that I leave the house. I tried to calm Martha down and took her back to her bedroom. I then brought her a glass of water and melatonin to help her sleep. I figured that the night would be peaceful after she took the medication. I was so tired that I decided to take a quick nap in the small room that Colleen had prepared for me. I didn't sleep long before I was awakened by a loud bang coming from downstairs. It was a loud banging sound, like something was being slammed shut over and over again. I jumped up, feeling anxious. I walked down the stairs, and as I approached the kitchen, the sight that greeted me froze me. In the dim light, Martha was standing in front of the oven, opening and closing the door violently. All I could see was her dark silhouette, like a scene from a horror movie. I called her name, but she just turned her head to look at me, then closed the door one last time and started walking towards me. My heart pounded as she approached, her eyes empty and cold. Martha walked up the stairs and I followed, trying to reassure her. But when she entered the room, she slammed the door shut. I stood outside anxiously for a moment, then gently opened the door to check. Martha was standing right next to the bed, facing the wall, not moving at all. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, as if I was witnessing something completely out of place. I gently led her back to bed and covered her with the blanket. I hoped this would be the last time I had to do this that night. I went back to the small room to rest, trying not to fall asleep right away to monitor the situation, but eventually the exhaustion pulled me into a sleep. I woke up again, this time to a sound from inside the room. I suddenly realized that the closet door in the room was ajar, and something like a dark head was peeking out from inside. My heart stopped when I realized it was Martha, hiding in the closet with a large knife in her hand. She stepped out of the closet, repeating her question from before. "Who are you? I don't know you." I tried to calm myself down and reminded her that I was her caregiver. But this time, the situation had changed. Martha was no longer just a patient. She was now a real threat to my life. I yelled at her to put the knife down, but she only came closer, waving it in the air. I quickly ran around her and ran down the stairs. I didn't call 911, but instead called Colleen as instructed, even though I was terrified. Colleen angrily told me not to leave the house and that I had to stand outside to make sure Martha didn't go anywhere. When Colleen got home, Martha was back in bed, fast asleep. Colleen even suspected that I was exaggerating until she found the knife next to her mother's bed. Although Colleen tried to convince me to continue working, I decided never to go back to that house again. That night, I had a terrible experience and will never forget it. I am a plumber, and this is my first job at a new company. There are only 5 employees and the boss decides who does what. I don't think it was a coincidence that I was assigned to work at a remote house in a rundown area for my first job. The call was for a house with a leaking pipe under the sink, a simple job that any new plumber could handle. As I drove up to the location, I felt immediately uneasy. The house looked abandoned for years with peeling bricks, tall grass, and no sign of anyone living there. I knocked on the door and a middle-aged man opened it. As soon as I saw him, I felt something was wrong. He had a strange smile, a distorted and disproportionate face, and a voice that was extremely soft and high-pitched, unlike his appearance. He invited me into the house and led me to the kitchen. Inside, the house was completely empty, without a single piece of furniture, just bare walls and a dirty floor. I put the tools down on the kitchen counter and opened the cabinet under the sink to check the pipes. As I lay under the sink, I noticed that the man was standing right above me, his legs spread wide on either side of me. It felt extremely uncomfortable and unsafe. I politely asked him to back off a bit, and he did, but he was still too close for me to concentrate on my work. After a while of checking, I realized that there was no sign of water leakage. I got out of the sink and tried turning on the faucet, but not a drop of water came out. I looked at him and asked why the water wasn't running. He chuckled and said he must have turned off the main water valve without realizing it. I was really feeling uneasy now. How could someone accidentally turn off the main water valve without knowing? I asked him to turn it back on. He said he would be right back and left the kitchen. But instead of heading towards the basement where the water valve was usually located, I heard his footsteps coming up the stairs. I had never heard of a water valve being located on the upper floor of any house. At that moment, my instincts told me that something was terribly wrong. I started hearing more footsteps from upstairs, quickly coming down. In a split second, I decided to leave immediately. I gathered my things and quickly left the house, running straight to my van. I was a big man and not easily intimidated, but there was something about this situation and this man that made me feel like I was in danger. I took one last look at the house before driving away. When I called Dave to report the incident, I said it was a prank, because that sounded more plausible than saying I was being scared by a strange man. After further investigation, I discovered that the house was actually an abandoned house. The phone number calling for repairs turned out to be an internet number, not a real phone number. I reported the incident to the local police, just so they would know and be able to shut the house down. After that terrifying incident, I never went back to that suspicious area again, and I only worked for that plumbing company for about a year. In 2019, I worked for Domino's, and it was my first night. I had just started this job because I needed money to cover my school and dorm expenses. That night, I was training, and when you are training, you will be accompanied by a manager who will monitor, evaluate, and guide you through your first deliveries. At around 8 p.m., we received an order. Back then, our store did not have an electronic system like it does now, so we had to look up the address on our phones to get directions. The order was for 4 large pizzas and 2 bottles of Pib. We loaded them into my car since I was the one being evaluated, along with the manager and another apprentice I didn't know well. The house we were delivering to was in a remote, isolated area, about a 15 to 20-minute drive from our town. The town was very old, so it wasn't unusual to walk through long stretches of empty streets. However, when we arrived, we noticed that the house looked extremely old, almost dilapidated. The wood on the walls was peeling, some of the windows were boarded up, and the house overall showed no signs of life. I asked the manager if we really had to go in. He assured us that it would only take a few minutes and told us to stay calm. I remember that when we got out of the car, both the apprentice and I felt nervous as we headed toward the front door. Finally, I got up the courage to ring the doorbell, but it didn't ring. Instead, the manager knocked loudly on the door, but no one answered. We waited about 15 seconds and then knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. Our patience was starting to wear thin, and a foul smell was coming from somewhere. It was unclear whether it was the smell from the house or something inside that had died. After about a minute of waiting, the door opened, but only just enough to reveal a man's face. He asked who we were and why we were there. The manager replied that we were here to deliver pizza. The man then opened the door completely and became extremely friendly, which made us shiver. He was an older man, at least in his 50s. He said it took him a while to open the door because he had difficulty moving. The manager handed him the bill and asked if he wanted to pay by cash or check. The man said he would go get the money and then turned around, leaving the door open and going inside. When I looked inside, I realized that there was no furniture, just a bare floor and a few thin blankets. It was obvious that he was living here temporarily because no one else lived in the house. Just then we heard footsteps coming from upstairs, not just one person, but several. Our anxiety grew. What the apprentice had said earlier seemed to be true. Someone was watching us as we entered the house. The manager shouted to ask if he had gotten the money, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped, and everything became silent. We could only hear each other's breathing. The manager told us to stay at the front door in case the man came back, and he would go around the house to see what was going on. We nodded, and he started walking around to the back. The apprentice and I stood there listening anxiously. We heard footsteps, but this time not from upstairs, but from below, as if someone was moving below us. We looked at each other in confusion and fear. Suddenly, we heard the manager yell, followed by hurried footsteps. He ran toward the front of the house where we were standing and yelled for us to get back in the car immediately. I had never driven so fast in my life. On the way back, the manager told us that when he came around the back, he saw a group of people sitting around a small fire in the dark. As he got closer, he realized they were laughing around a live fawn, as if they found it hilarious. My heart almost stopped when I heard that. Both my apprentice and I quit shortly after, and I heard that the manager quit a month later. I never did any delivery work again. Apparently, we had walked into some kind of cult meeting, and I was just grateful that we got out when we did.